Okay, good evening, everyone. Tonight's shir is no suspense here, is given for a complete Yeshuas and Hatzlacha in our in our war. So let's keep that in mind. We're going to go to war now with a very interesting topic, one of my favorite ones, and one which basically is going to be the last real one in Seder Nezikin, because we are ending Shavuos in a couple of days. And not only are we finishing Shavuos, this is pretty much the end of the real Nezikin in terms of the Masechtas. The next two Masechtas are not really Nezikin related, Avodah Zarah and Horios. So, and after that, we're into Kudshim. So I got to dig deep. It's going to be a challenge, but we'll worry about it then. But this is really the end of Nezikin as we know it for another, 5 or so years until we come back to Bava Kama in 2030. You believe that? But until then, we're going to end off with one of my favorite topics, which is the four Shomrim. Okay, there's a perek. The last perek in Shavuos, perek number 8, is called Arba Shomrim. And I always like to call it's like the Cliff Notes. If you missed Bava Kama and Bava Metzia, and you want to know the basics about the Arba Shomrim, you could look at this one perek, the last perek in Shavuos, which talks about the various Shavuos, because after all, we finished speaking about Shavuos Bitoy, about Shavuos Shav, Shavuos Ha'edus, Shavuos Hadayanim. The last ones are the Shavuos HaShomrim. And the reason why it's near and dear to me is because this topic of the Shomrim is the topic that most kids learn early on in their yeshiva, or as they call it these days, day school careers. And we'll discuss maybe why we like to talk about the Shomrim a lot, right? We learn it in Bava Metzia, and it's something that children could relate to. So let's look at it and see why the Shomrim are so interesting. So I am all the way at the end on page 49, although Daf didn't get to this yet. I think this is the Daf for Thursday, or in Washington, that's tomorrow. So let us begin. Arba Shomrim. Okay, what I want to do tonight, and I want to give a little bit of a caveat, is I don't.
So they waited till the end of Nezikin to teach us about the Arba Shomer.
Just like they waited to the last Daf in Gittin to tell you reasons why you should or should not get divorced.
So
That's the
you need to know
beauty.
Arba Shomer in order to know Nezikin, and they put it in the last page.
The very last, yes. We always do that. We save the best for last. But yeah, so I always called this like the Cliff Notes on Shomrim. It's one Perek, it's one Mishnah, a little bit of Gemara. It's actually mostly Mishnah. And so I was saying the one caveat I just wanted to give was that we're going to talk about things tonight that I don't necessarily go into a lot. There's a lot of what we call lumdus, topics that are very, very, what's the word? They're very analytical, and there's a lot of back and forth. But, like I said, because I enjoy it so much, even though you're not supposed to really enjoy, I think the Gemara in Eruvin in the middle says somewhere that you can't really have a favorite topic. You could have favorite children, you could have favorite ice cream flavors, but the one thing you cannot have is favorite Torah topics. So you have to treat everything equally. So anyways, so getting back to what I was saying is that because there's going to be a lot of lumdus back and forth, just you have to halt cup a little bit. There aren't going to be any nice psychology articles that talk about items like that. Although there is a very deep insight we're going to get to when we talk about the Gemara and Bava Kama. But let's start off by discussing who these four Shomrim are. Right now, we've touched in the last 7 or 8 days, the last week of Shavuos, does talk about a lot of scattered inyanim that we come across in Bava Kama and Bava Metzia, and we've spoken about the Shomrim, but this Mishnah really encapsulates all the Shomrim in a nutshell. So let's talk about them. We have Shomer Chinam, Shoel, Nosei Sachar, and Socher. Okay, we're going to talk about the one. We're going to start with the easiest one. Or when I say easiest, Tosfos actually says over here, the order in the Torah is Shomer Chinam and Shomer Sachar. But we're going to start with the easiest one, or the one that's most makel, and the next one is Hashoel. That's the most stringent. You have the Shomer Chinam, and then you have the Shoel, and then you have the Nosei Sachar and the Socher. Okay, the Nosei Sachar is a Shomer Sachar. He gets paid to watch. The Shomer Chinam does not get paid to watch. The Shoel, not only does he watch it, he uses it also. And the Socher, someone who rents it, is exactly like a Shomer Sachar in terms of his laws. Okay, so now the Mishnah says, Shomer Chinam Nishba al Hakol. The Shomer Chinam swears on everything. What does he swear? The one thing that the Shomer Sachar has to do is just not be negligent. That's all we're asking from him. Don't leave the door open if you're watching an animal. Okay? Don't, if you're watching, a book, don't read it too close to the fireplace. Okay? That's all we're asking. We're asking the very, very minimum from a person is not to be negligent. Okay? Therefore, if anything else happens to the object, he takes what we call a shvua, and that's it.
He's not allowed to read it. If he's a Shomer Chinam, he's not allowed to read it.
Correct.
No, he said don't read it too close to the fire.
Oh, okay. Don't bring it. We have a Bach that makes a correction. Don't bring it close to the fireplace. Right. He's not allowed to read it. In fact, he can't touch it unless he gets permission to. V'hashoel mishalem esakol. The shoel, the one who borrows an object and he uses it, he pays on every single occasion. Okay, and Rashi points out, Rashi says over here that he is chayav if the animal breaks a leg, if he dies, if it gets stolen, if he gets lost, hits by lightning, anything except mesa machem smalacha. And Rashi over here quotes the Gemara in Bava Metzia that says that if I borrow an animal and it dies because you worked it not too hard, you worked it like the normal way, okay? And if it died, it wasn't your fault, then it's not your fault, right? It all makes logical sense like everything else does, because that's the reason why he borrowed it. For example, if you borrow a pen and the guy comes back and he says, well, you borrowed it, but there's not a lot of ink left. So you could say, well, that's why I borrowed it, to write, right? So that's another example of something, what we call today depreciates. Okay, so that is the shoel. The nosei sachar is the shomer sachar. Okay, v'hasocher nishbain al ashvura v'al ashvuya v'al hamesa u'mishalmen es ha'aveda v'sagneva. So the shomer sachar is right in the middle. Okay, he gets the stringencies of one side and the kulas of the other side. So, for example, if something weird happens and he has the animal and it drops dead, or if it gets kidnapped, okay, that he's not responsible. He is responsible, what we call geneva va'aveda, okay, if it gets stolen or if it gets lost, okay, that is something that he is chayav, okay. Now, Rashi points out on the side over here that there's no, that this Mishnah is actually written, it's duplicated. We see that sometimes, not often, but this Mishnah is actually duplicated in Hasocher Es HaPoalim in Bava Metzia Daf Tzadi Gimel. But Rebbe over here brought it in to make a whole chapter within itself because he wanted to point out the halachas of a korban shvua. Okay, meaning that all of this is monetary related. There is no korban shavua. So Rashi on the side gets into that discussion. Let's do a little bit more of the Mishnah, just to get a little bit more understanding. Amar l'shomer chinam hechan shori. Amar lo mes v'hu nishbar o nishba o nignav. What happens if now a shomer chinam again? He's the most lenient out of all of them. So when the owner comes back and says, "Can you please give me my ox back?" and he says, "You'll never believe it. It died last night." Okay. Now the truth is, the Mishnah says that what if the truth was that it got stolen or lost? Okay. Oavad. And the Mishnah goes on to say nishbar. It really broke a leg, right? Or if he says nishbar, the shomer says it broke a leg, v'hu so nishbar nignav, o avad, right? Nishbar v'hu so nishbar nignav, o avad nignav v'hu so nishbar nishma o avad, period. Or avad v'hu so nishbar nishma o nignav. What happens if he is lying, but he didn't really have to lie? Because every single thing he says, every claim is accepted, because after all, Shomer Chinam is the most lenient. What if he, for whatever reason, is a liar, and he lied about how it is missing, but it didn't really affect the halachic status because he would have gotten away with it anyway, and the owner says, Mashpia Chani, he says, really? You're telling me that X happened to it? Swear to me. Remember, we had this Mashpia Chani, right, regarding Shuas Edus. Amar Amen, and he said Amen Pater. Okay, so he is Pater. The reason why he's Pater is because he would have been Pater anyway. So therefore, him changing the story doesn't make his case any better. And the Mishnah goes on to say, well, what if it's the opposite? He says, I don't know what you're talking about. You never gave me anything. Same thing. He lied about ever getting it, but because he would have been pater on everything else, he is still pater. Hechan shori, amar lo avad, the last case we're going to talk about, is he says, where is the ox? Amar lo, his response was, avad, I lost it. Mashpia chani v'amar amen. The owner says, oh yes, swear to me. And the shomer said, amen. So now the plot thickens. Here, he lied for his benefit because he ate it. So mishalem esakeren, he pays, he has to pay back, okay, because he was busted. Hodem atzmo mishalem keren v'chomish v'asham. If he lies and then says, you know what, I lied, I'm going to fess up, then he's chayev a korban asham. Remember, we discussed that a couple of weeks ago in Shavuos, and he pays the keren, he pays the principal, and an extra fifth. And the last case is hechan shori v'amar lo nigdav mashpia chani v'amar amen. He says, the owner says, where is it? And he said, you'll never believe it, it was stolen. Now, we love when things are stolen because when we have a taina of Geneva, there's a lot of things that open up. And this is what we call Toein Tanas Ganav. This Shomer is claiming that it was stolen, but the Ha'edin Me'edin Asosha Ganvu, he wasn't really stolen because he actually stole it. So when he steals it himself, Mishalem Tashlume Kefel, he has to pay Kefel because we treat him as the Ganav. So just like a Ganav would ordinarily pay Kefel, here the Shomer becomes the Ganav. And that's what they call Toein Tanas Ganav. Okay? So that's just a little drop in the bucket when it comes to the various halachas of Shomrim. So we discussed the 4 Shomrim. We discussed the various things that you're chayav, the various things that you're pater, and we left off, or we ended off by discussing Toein Tanas Ganav. Okay, again, which is when the owner claims, when the shomer claims it was taken, and it was proven that he's a liar because he took it, he wants it for himself, then we throw the book at him and we say he is chayav kefil. So I want to start where I always start, with the Sefer HaChinuch, because believe it or not, in Mishpatim, we know that Mishpatim has a lot of has a lot of mitzvos, a lot of these cases are actually mitzvos. For example, it's a mitzvah not to be a shomer chinam. It's a mitzvah to, if you're in a situation where you're a shomer chinam or a shomer sachar or a shoel and something happens, so it's a mitzvah to judge the case as appropriate for what kind of shomer you are. Okay, those are the mitzvos. They're number 57, 59, and 60. Mitzvah number 58 is what we call mitzvahs based in ladun bedin toin vinitan. Right, this is called the mitzvah. Right, it gets one of the 613. It's called to judge a case if two people end up again. Not that it bears repetition, but there's some mitzvahs that you don't want to do, like giving a get, like doing yibum, like chalitza. Right, there are certain times you're in a mitzvah sota, believe it or not, as a mitzvah. Right? Probably not recommended. So there are mitzvahs that you really, really don't want to do, but in case you're in this situation, you have to do them. Here's another example. You have two people suing each other, two people fighting in court. It's a mitzvah to adjudicate, right? To judge and to see who's the real, right? Who is correct. So this is action number mitzvah 58, and the Sefer HaChinuch says, "Shenitztavinu ladun b'din toin v'nitan." Kolomar, shena'aseh din l'chol mi shetoveh es chaveiro b'shum davar. Right, Ruvain has a claim against Shimon. Oh, shehilvahu. Why? Because he claims he lent Shimon money. Oh, hifkido, or he gave an object to Shimon to watch, and now Shimon became a shomer of some sort. Oh, Gazalo, or Shimon stole from Ruvain. Oh, Ashko, or oppressed him. Oh, Chamso, or extorted. Shenemar akol dvar pesha. Asher yomar ki huzeh. We're going to look at those psukim in a second. In Parshas Mishpatim, uba haperush al lashon zeh shel ki huzeh she'ein nishpatin min haTorah ela im ken yoda hanitba b'miktsas hahalva. Okay, we're going to see in one of the psukim that describe the shomer chinam. It says ki huzeh. Okay, and that opens up the door to the topic of moda b'miktsas, someone who admits to partial loan and denies the other part of the loan. Okay, so says the chinuch, avalim yomar lo hayudvar ma'olam. But if the borrower, in this case Shimon, says, I don't know who you are, I never borrowed money from you, I never received anything to watch, we never met before, you're making all this up, right? That's called lahadam, lo hayudvar ma'olam. Oh, echzarti hakol milva, or I gave it to you back last week and you just don't remember. Pater mishvua min haTorah. Okay, that's what we said in Daf Yomi on Mem Gimel, Mem Daled, when we were discussing about Shvuas Hesis, right? If you remember, we had that Rav Nachman instituted. Somebody who says, I don't know who you are, you have a claim against me, and I never borrowed. So the Torah says you don't have to take a Shvuah. Okay, you are exempt from a Shvuah, and we're going to see why. Okay. Okay, so that's a little bit about the laws of Toin Venitan. And then there's a very, very, very short shoresh. Remember how the Sefer Chinuch always gives a reason as to what the mitzvah is? Shoresh hadinim yadua. He says the roots of these dinim are well known because, as the Chinuch always says, that these are to preserve our society, to have a system where, again, we don't encourage people to fight and to sue each other, but if need be, we need a system, and this goes back to, believe it or not, it's one of the Shiva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, right? He actually has a discussion over here, or he doesn't, excuse me, the Minchas Chinuch actually has a discussion whether all of these laws that we spend hours breaking our heads on in yeshivas, right, and in Daf Yomi this month, is do any of these laws apply to non-Jews? Well, the answer is it depends on how you define right? It goes back to a machlokas, the Rambam and the Ramban, about how we define dinim, right? One opinion is that dinim, which is one of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, is basically setting up a law system to govern all the other six mitzvahs. Or, according to the Ramban, it's setting up court systems to deal with exactly these kinds of deals of people who are in, fighting each other. And one is a Toin, one's a Nitan, and all these cases of Shomrim. So that also was included in that. So that's a very separate discussion about whether it applies to non-Jews or not. But trust me, there is what to say about it. I just want to bring one other thing. I saw the end of the Sefer HaChinuch before we go to the actual pasuk. He says this mitzvah, again, this mitzvah of dealing with two people suing each other. He says, "V'nohagas mitzvah zu she'anu chayivin ladun b'zachar mavalo b'nekevus." Okay, it doesn't apply to females. What does that mean? That means that you can't be a shomeret chinam, like that one, Shmuel, right? What does that mean? A woman can't be a shomer chinam? No, aval she'enan danos, because women can't act as judges, right? Remember we had that in Daf Yomi World a couple of weeks ago, where it talked about Devorah, how she got away with being a judge, and did she really judge, or was, right? That's a whole, again, a whole separate discussion. But women are excluded in this because they can't judge. But that doesn't mean that they can't be included in people who need to get paid or people who have to pay other people. Right? There's a difference regarding claims of women who are married. Okay? What if a court does not hear a case of two litigants? They are mevatel and aseh v'onsho gadol ma'od, which is shegoram churban la'aretz. You see that? If you ever want to know what destroys society is when you don't have proper cases to judge and to figure out who's the rightful owner of money, or who's the rightful owner of this house. You have two people fighting over this, two people fighting over that. If you can't clarify and come to peace, says the Sefer HaChinuch, this is one for the refrigerator, it causes destruction. It causes destruction in the world. She'ein haaretz misyasheves ela bedin, because the world is only misyasheves, civilized, with din, with proper justice. Look at that. Kumosha amru zichonim levracha al shloshet dvarim ha'olam omed. Remember that? Pirkei Avos, the first chapter. Emes and din and shalom. What's the middle one? One of them is din. V'zos achas min hamitzvos shenitztavu aleha kol b'nei ha'olam bichlalam. Lefi she'i efshar liyushav ha'olam zulata. Look at the words he uses. He says this is one of those commandments that apply to everyone in the world. All people in the civilized world are commanded, because without it, there is no civilization. Without judges, without judgments, without coming to, honest, either compromises or final, right, or figuring things out in a peace and a just way, it leads to total chaos. And obviously, you see, the various societies in the world where there is no law and order, and you see how these countries are run. So I just wanted to share that little bit of the chinuch with you at the end. Now let us go to Mishpatim. Okay, let us look at the first couple of psukim in Mishpatim, Perek 22. Ki yiten ish el re'ehu. All the fun starts. Perek Chaf Beis Pasuk Vav. Ki yiten ish el re'ehu kesef hakelim lishmor. V'gunav mebeis ha'ish im yimatzeh haganav yishalem shnayim. So if you're looking for the word shomer chinam or shomer sachar, you're not going to find it. The Torah, as it always, or I should say, as it usually does, gives clues, very, very good clues, but it's not going to tell you that this is a shomer chinam. When it comes to the shoel, though, it says v'chi yishal. It does tell you yishal. It does tell you he's a shoel. So it doesn't tell you who a shomer chinam is. It doesn't tell you who a shomer sachar is. Okay, and the socher is not really talked about at all. So we'll forget about him. So let's start off with the first one. Reuven gives to Shimon kesef okelim lishmor. Okay, something to watch, something of value to watch. The gunav mibeis ha'ish, and it's stolen from Shimon's house. Im yimatzeh haganav yishalem shnayim. Okay, if the thief is caught, as we know, a ganav pays kefel. Okay, im lo yimatzeh haganav, if you can't find the thief, meaning Reuven is out of luck, he lost his favorite watch, okay? V'nikra of balabais el Elokim, the owner of the house, in this case Shimon, goes over to Elokim. Who is Elokim? So usually Elokim is the man above. Here in Mishpatim, Elokim is referring to judges. Okay? Very interesting discussion I heard, relevant to any sofrim out there, is you have to have kavana when you write Elokim, okay, to mean the man upstairs, God, okay? What about the Elokims that are in Mishpatim? What if you have in mind that when you write the word Elokim in Mishpatim, it means God, when we know that it refers to a judge? That's a shaila I actually heard coincidentally last week in one of the shiurim I went to. And then part B of that shaila, Shmuel would appreciate it, is there's one time in the Torah where the word Elokim could mean either a judge or the Lord. And that's the pasuk of Shmuel. Okay, maybe he fell asleep. Elokim lo tikalel. Right?
I'm not sleeping. I'm not sleeping.
You're thinking. So Rashi, in the pasuk of Elokim lo tikalel v'anasi b'amcha lo ta'or, right, in Chamishi and Mishpatim, has actually two interpretations. Either it's a judge, because the rest of Mishpatim are talking about judges, or it actually refers to the Lord. So that you can't curse God. Another lav, like we don't know that already. But so the question is, what do you do about that one? Who do you have to have in mind for that? Okay, that's just a little sofer humor for those who appreciate it. Last pasuk, and this is the pasuk we're gonna focus on, right? So again, the shomer chinam is watching; it gets stolen. All he has to do is swear, as long if he didn't do what we call shlichus yad. Shlichus yad is a subject all by itself. Next time when we get to it, we'll have a shir on it. Shlichus yad is one word: abuse. If you do something that you're not supposed to do with the object. So the example we gave in the beginning, where you took the book or you read the book by the fireplace. So in this case, you're not allowed to read the book. If I give you something to watch, you can't open it unless you ask me. If I give you something to watch, you can't try it on, right? You can't do whatever. I give you a basketball, you can't go play with it, right? That's called shlichus yad. And if you think that it's not a serious offense, there's a Mishnah at the very end of the third perek of Bava Metzia, says you're even chayav if you even think about it, believe it or not. There's very few things that if you think about eating a cheeseburger, as great as it sounds, you're not liable. You have to actually eat it. There's a discussion whether if you even think, and Tosas over there, not for now, discusses, is this really thinking, or is it verbalizing? Okay, Tosus over there, if you remember, I think it's Daf Mem Gimel or so, compares it to Pigel, right? By the animal, by the Karban, where you actually have to verbalize it. So that's Shlichas Yad. It's a very, very serious offense. And the Shomer actually has to swear that he did not abuse the object. So in our case, if I give you the book and you're not allowed to read it, and you actually read it and it gets stolen the next day, you're actually liable. Very weird. If you didn't read it, then you would be exempt. But because you broke the rule, as they say in the store, you break it, you buy it, right? Once you break the rule over here, so then you cannot swear to pata yourself anymore. That's why the pasuk says, "Im lo shalach yado b'mlechetz re'ehu." Then the pasuk ends off by saying, "Al kol dvar pesha, al shor, al chamor, al sel, salma, al kol aveda." Any kind of pesha, any kind of anything wrong that was done, for whether it was an animal, whether it was a garment, or anything that was lost, asher yomar ki huzeh, where one of the parties says, "This is it." Ad ha'elokim yadvo dvar shnehen. Until Elokim, we know, is referring to a judge. They both should come. Asher yarshiyu and Elokim yeshalem shnayim l're'ehu. And in that case, when you are guilty, you pay double. Okay. So remember how we said, remember the Chinuch said there's three words that opens up a whole world? This is the pasuk. Ki hu zeh. Okay? Three innocent words that keep yeshivas in business. Right, Shmuel? These three words have much ink spilt on it. Empires were built on this in Bavel, and this is the introduction to the topic of what we call modeh b'miktsas. Okay? Now, what I would like to do, and by the way, I didn't say this in the beginning, one of the reasons why I said why I like the Shomrim so much and why I think they teach these laws in sixth grade, seventh grade. I don't learn it until eighth grade. But the one word, and unfortunately this has become a dirty word, is the word responsibility. Right? We hate that word today. Nobody wants to be responsible for anything, right? It's a very, very tricky word. We try everything to slip out of responsibility. But the beauty, and I think why it's inculcated in seventh graders and in eighth graders, why we love teaching about the Shomrim and Bava Metzia, right? We learn all these what we thought back then are, our wacky and silly laws about oxes and losing things and having things stolen, is the importance of responsibility, because that's what, at least we would like to think, sets us apart from other people, and how the Torah speaks so much about just basic things, like in this case, giving something to someone, right? Happens all day long, right? Just the basic fact that there is this concept of responsibility is a very, very great eye-opening um, notion that things just don't happen for no reason and you can't just get away with things. That's why I think I always like the Shomrim, and I think that's why we started at a very young age to teach this lesson of responsibility. So getting back to Ki Huzeh, I want to look at the Rashi, because Rashi has a lot of possibilities to talk about. You see, there's one thing to be lumdish when you have a Gemara with Rishonim and Achronim, and everybody has a different opinion about how to tackle a certain subject. But when it comes to the Torah Shebechsav, when you get to these tricky parshios, for example, of Kitetze or Emor, or over here Mishpatim, it's always interesting to see, well, what do the Parshanim say about these psukim that Rishonim and Achronim break their heads on, right? We have all these, these chaburas and these shir klolis, especially about subjects that are related to like the Shomrim and Shavuos, right? We have all these very in-depth classes. It's really cool to see how early Parshanim, Rishonim like Rashi and the Ramban discuss these Shomrim. So Rashi says over here, Lefi Pshuto, when I'm reading Rashi, Ki huzeh, Lefi Pshuto, Asher Yomar Ha'ed, Ki huzeh Shenishbata Alav. So, first of all, who's talking? Okay. The witness, says Rashi, if you just read the literal sense of the Pasuk, who's doing the talking over here? It's the aid. The aid says, Ki huzeh. Okay. This is the very article which you, the Shomer, are talking about. Again, it says, Al kol dvar pesha, al shar al chamor, al seh, al salma, al kol aveda, asher yomar ki huzeh. So the Torah, a lot of times, is very unclear as to who, right? When you use prepositions, right, you don't know who's talking, right? Who's the one saying ki huzeh? So Rashi says, if I didn't know any better, I would say that it's the witness who's making this person swear, say, you're swearing on this sweater that got stolen. This is it. You have to say, this is what I'm talking about. Okay? Ki hu zeh shenishbata alav, harehu etzlecha. Really, it's actually in your possession, right? That's what Rashi says. Ad hadayanim yavo dvar shnehem. Okay, Rashi goes on to say that this matter of dispute has to go in front of the judges. V'yachkuru sa'edim. Okay, and they come before the judges, and these witnesses are examined. Im ksherim hem. If these witnesses are kosher, v'yarshi'uhu l'shomer zeh, and they will punish this shomer, then yishalem shnayim, right? Asher yarshiun elokim yishalem shnayim l'reihu. Again, Rashi is very right. Again, I'm going to say it for the fifth time. We spend so much time in depth in the Gemara and in Tosfos and in the Rush and in the Ran and in the back. It's wonderful to see what Rashi and Chumash says. We forget Chumash a lot of times. That's why I like to always go back to it and say, what is the Pashut, right? We talk about the Ibn Ezra a lot, about the Rebbeinu B'chai. What is the Rashbam, right? What is the Pashut Pshat of the Pasuk? The Pashut Pshat of the Pasuk is that if the Eidim are right, that the Shomer actually lied and stole the item that he was supposed to watch and he kept it for himself, then Yishalem Shnayim. What if not? V'im yarsh, and Rashi continues, V'im yarshiu es ha'edim, and if the judges go and they say that the Eidim are wrong, okay, if they go and they're marshia, the witnesses, how could that happen? Shenimtzu zomimim. Let's say the Eidim are false witnesses. They said something, and it was proven that there's no way they could have said their Eidim because they were somewhere else. Then Yishalmuhem Shnayin l'Shomer. Then the Shomer gets his double. So the Shomer gets paid back double. Then Yishalmuhem Shnayin l'Shomer. Correct. The Shomer, because the Eidim tried to make the Shomer pay kefel. So now, as we know, as we learned in Makos, that the Eidim Zomimim, right, get back what they try to do. So they now have to pay the Shomer twice. Okay, so that's what Rashi says. This is what he calls Pashut. V'Rabbaseinu zal darshu ki huzeh lo lamed she'ein mechayvin oso shvua ela im ken hoda b'miktsas. Says Rashi, and this is where it gets very interesting, if it wasn't up until now, that Rashi says, now, what's beautiful about Rashi is that there are so many things to talk about on these three words. The question is, why does Rashi, and we have this a lot of times, why does Rashi pick a certain medrash to discuss when there's a lot of options he could use, right? There are books written about why does Rashi say this as opposed to this? Why does he bring that down and not that down, right? Something caused Rashi to only say this following pshat about ki huzeh. He says, she'en mechayvin oso shvua elim ken hoda b'miktsas. He's only chayiv a shvua if he's moda b'miktsas, lomar kach v'kach ani chayiv l'cha, v'hamosar nignav mimeni. And that's the end of Rashi. And he quotes a Gemara in Bava Kama Daf Kuf Zayin that we're going to see. Meaning that the shomer is only chayiv, a shvua de oraisa, okay, if he admits to part of it and he denies part of it. The whole time when we're talking about moda b'miktsas, we automatically think about a loan. We don't necessarily think about moda b'miktsas when it comes to a shomer, right? What would that be? But that's what exactly Rashi hones in on. He says there's only a chiyuv of a shvua if he says, I'm only chayiv you X, the hamosar, and the Y was stolen from me. So if I give you a pound of apples to watch, okay, and you claim that half of the pound was stolen from you, okay, and the other half I'm chayiv, that's called moda b'miktsas. Okay, part of it I'm pater because it was stolen. Okay, and part of it I'm chayiv. Okay, or if he's any kind of shomer, that would be chayiv on something. Okay, so that's what we call a moda b'miktsas when it comes to a shomer. Okay, the Ramban actually says, he quotes Rashi, and again, we don't learn Ramban on these sugyas, we learn the Ramban in the Gemara, but it's just very interesting to know that he says Rashi doesn't really make sense, because, I'm reading the words of the Ramban, V'zeh ha'inyan shekasfu harav divrei yechidim, hu ve'enam kahalacha. He says, this, what Rashi brought down, happens to be one particular opinion in Bava Kama, but it's not the halacha. Shahashomrim enam tzrichen kafir b'miktsas v'hoda b'miktsas. Because a shomer, in order to take a shvua, doesn't have to be moda b'miktsas. V'afilu kisheto en tanim ganav b'kol ha'pikadon chayav hu lishav shvuas hashomrim. If he says ganav, the whole pound was stolen from me, he has to take a shvua shomrim. Okay? V'od mispar b'gemara b'rayas gemuras, and the Ramban says, if you learn Gemara, you would know, because when he's kofer, be'ikar hapikadon v'amalo yifkadati etzli, he says, I don't even know who you are. You didn't give me anything. Im kofer ba'kol pater, if he denies everything, he's pater from a shvua. V'imod miktsas chayev b'shvua. V'zela divrei hakol. Everybody says that if he's mod miktsas, he's chayev b'shvua. V'afal pi sheharav eino omer ken b'ferish of b'gemara. Even though Rashi doesn't say this. So anyway, so the Ramban has a problem with Rashi. So the question is, what Gemara are they talking about? So I wanted to learn the Gemara together. This is a Gemara that unfortunately we missed when we were doing Bava Kama about a year ago. Gemara is on Daf Kuf Vav Amud Beis. Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom, says as follows: Amar Rab Chiya bar Abba Amar Rab Yochanan, says Rab Yochanan, Hatoen Tan is Ganav b'Pikadon. Okay, we think about, if, remember how we said that the case of Kefel, written by the Shomer Chinam, is when the Shomer himself, okay, claims that it was stolen, and really he was lying, so he stole it. That's called, again, Toin Tanas Ganov. If he does that, Eno Chayev ad sheyichbor b'miktsas v'yoda b'miktsas. You're only Chayev, a shvua, if you are moda b'miktsas in the actual theft. Meaning, he claims part of it was stolen, okay, and part of it I admit to. Okay, again, he says part of it, right, he is kofer in some of it, and he's moda in the other half of it. So we say, my time, Adamar Kra, ki huzeh. Because where's this pasuk written? Ki huzeh is actually written by the Shomer Chinam. So if we're saying the whole time that ki huzeh is another way of saying moda b'miktsas has to be applicable to the parsha it was written by. And it was written by a Shomer Chinam. So therefore, the Shomer Chinam himself has to be moda b'miktsas. That's the only time you'll ever have a real shvua da'oraisa for a shvua sashomrim. If he's moda in some and he's kofer in the other part, that is what springs on a shvua da'oraisa. Upligi de Rav Chia bar Abba dam Rav Chia bar Yosef erev parshios kasuv kan. So now on Daf Kuf Zayin, we're introduced to the topic of erev parshios. Okay, erev parshios basically means that just because something is said in one part, it doesn't mean that it applies to that part. It could be it could be transplanted to something else. So kihuzeh is a code word for moda b'miktsas. However, erev parshios transplants kihuzeh and it brings it to a new parsha. Which parsha? The parsha of, Rashi says, Im Kesef Talveh. Okay, even though it's written much later on in Mishpatim, the kihuzeh is not related at all to Shomer. A Shomer does not have to be moda b'miktsas in order to take a shvua. Okay, who is moda b'miktsas? A lova is moda b'miktsas. So that's how we explain why it doesn't belong in Parshas HaShomer. Okay? So the obvious question is, why not? Why do we say that kihuzeh has to be written by a milveh? Says the Gemara, umayshna milveh. Why does malveh, why does a borrower and a lender who have a lender who has a claim on a borrower, and the borrower says, and the borrower is moda b'miktsas, why is that the case? Okay, why do we completely say that it doesn't belong in a shomer and it could only be by a halva? Kiderabba, because of the famous rule of Rabbah, the Amar Rabbah, because Rabbah said the following: Mipnei Amra Torah moda b'miktsas atayna yishava. Okay, a very, very famous question. We had this recently in, we had it a week ago in Shavuos when it came to Moda b'Miktsas. We had it in Bav Metzia. We had it in Gittin and in Ksuva. So this is the fifth time that this is appearing. It's a very, very important psychological insight into the way people deal with loans. Okay, and once we understand human psychology, we could understand what was bothering Rabbah. Rabbah asked a question. His question was, why does the Torah say kihuzeh? Why does the Torah say that a moda b'miktsas has to take a shvua? So these are one of the questions where we actually have a question on the question, without getting too cute. Meaning, what's Rabbah's problem? What's Rabbah trying to find out? Is he trying to find out what we call Taima Dikra? Is he asking, why does the Torah have this concept? Or is there something else on Rabbah's mind? So I want to read the words of the Nemuka Yosef. The Nemuka Yosef asks the question. He actually brings this. He says, Kasav Haraj Zal, Shalo Baliten Tam Lama Moda B'Miktsas Chayev, the Kofer Bakol Potter. So says the Rosh, the Nemuka Yosef quotes the Rosh, he says, it's not that Rabbah is trying to what we call give a reason why the Torah has a certain mitzvah, right? We discussed this way back, I think, in beginning of Sanhedrin when we talked about a king and having too many wives and going back to Egypt, right? Over there, the Torah, the Gemara has a discussion about why does the Torah give a reason for something. It's called Dorish Taima Dikra. Why can't you have, remember, when it comes to why can't you have too many wives? Because they'll lead you down a bad path, right? So over there, the Torah gives a reason. But generally, we don't need a specific reason to know why something is usher or something is mutter. So if that's true, why is Rabbah bothered by, why does the Torah say moda b'miktsas? Okay, it's none of your business. Okay, the Torah gives a reason. So Sarash says, no, he's not asking why moda b'miktsas you're chayav a shvua But if I say I don't know you anything, I'm pater. The davka Rebbe Shimon who the darish time of dekra. The ein derech amora lefarish time of dekra. Rabba, okay, Rabba lived in the year, he died in 320. So he lived at the end of the 200s, beginning of the 300s. He was living in Bavel. And this is one of the things that put him on the map. He was a very, very interesting Amor. In fact, if you remember, he used to make jokes a lot. The Gemara says in Shabbos that he would always start a shiur off with a joke, right? You know how he starts speeches off with jokes. So Rabbah always used to give a joke in the beginning of a shiur to get his students involved. So this is Rabbah, okay, Rabbah Bar Nachmani. So it's not that he's asking why does the Torah give a reason or why shouldn't it give a reason. Elachi pirusha mipnei ma amra Torah moda miktsas atayni yishava yehenaman b'migo. The reason what was bothering Rabbah is why should a person have to take a shvua? Can't he just use a migo? The iboy kofer bekulo, right? A person could say, I don't know you anything. And we learned last week in Daf Yomi that if you're kofer and everything, if you deny the whole loan, you don't have to do any chiyuv shvua. So if there's no chiyuv shvua on you, why should I be any worse if I deny it only halfway, right? The words of Rashi made this famous. He said the word Meshiv Aveda. He says, I shouldn't be any worse than a Meshiv Aveda. Meshiv Aveda is somebody who finds an object that's lost. And he says, and he returns it. And the person who gets it says, thank you for returning the $100, but I actually lost $150, and I think you stole 50. Swear to me that you didn't take 50. And the guy's like, what? I could have kept this money and not given you anything. So that's what we call a Meshiv Aveda. If you make people swear, okay, that you're right, because you're Meshiv Aveda, nobody would ever return money like that again. If they knew that they had to swear if there was a little bit of a claim on the other side that not all of it was returned. So the same thing over here. This person says, listen, I'm being a nice guy to you. I'm admitting to half. If I admit to zero, I don't have to take any shvua. Now that I'm admitting to half, I got to take a shvua? That doesn't make sense. That's what was bothering Rabbah. So Rabbah answers, Chazaka ein adam meis panav b'bnei balchova. Because a person who borrows money will never ever have the chutzpah to tell the person who lent the money, I have no idea who you are. You never lent me any money. Okay? Now, why would a person never do that? So you'd say, well, it's a chutzpah. The guy did a favor. So that's what Rashi says. Rashi says, Ena de meis panav b'pnei she'osa lo tova. The key word over here is tova. How could you have the chutzpah, someone who lent you money, right, who did a favor for you and bailed you out, and now you say you never got any money from him? There's a Tosfos in Ksuvas that says, Ein adam meiz hechech shechavero makir b'shikro. Very interesting wording, a little different than Rashi. Not that a person would ever lie to someone after him helping you out. How could a person lie to someone when he knows that person knows the truth? Right, very deep insight over here. Not that he did a favor for you, but where you know that person knows that you're lying. Because if you really borrowed the money, unless the guy completely lost his memory, he's going to know that you're lying. So a person would never lie to that kind of a person. Okay, so that's a machlokes, exactly Rashi Tosfos. There are actually nafkaminas, like, for example, a shomer. So if a shomer says, I don't know who you are, right? You're not doing me a favor. I'm doing you the favor. But the shomer does know the truth. So there is a machlokes, there is a nafkamina, whether or not this has to do with looking a gift horse in the mouth, like Rashi says, or Tosfos, that you're not going to lie in front of someone who knows the real truth. Okay, so let's just finish the psychology of Rabbah. So Rabbah says, so you're not gonna say I never got anything from you. Okay, meaning Rabbah says, well, you're not gonna lie, and therefore so on the one hand, on the one extreme, you're not gonna say that you got zero from him. So therefore, what should you do? Because this guy was so nice to you, you say, yes, I owe you the money, right? It's hard to admit, but I owe you money. So why is he playing this game? Why is the borrower playing this game of, well, I only owe you half, right? I paid you half, and now I owe you half. So why is he only admitting to half? If I admit to all of it, he's going to want all of it back. So you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to, what they say, I'm going to just kick the can. I'm going to procrastinate, right? In the next few months, when the market rebounds, when I could sell my stocks, when I'm in a much better position, I will pay him back. So you know what I'm going to say now? I'm going to say that really it's only half. Okay? That I only owe him half. Hilkach, Rame Rachmana Shvua Ilayo Bekula. So you know what the Torah knew people the way they think. And they knew that people like to procrastinate and admit partially that they owe them and are for the other half. So you know what Rabbah says? We're going to make you take a shvua on everything so that you'll admit to everything. And people generally don't lie when it comes to shavuos. Okay, so therefore, if you really say, when a person says you owe me $100, if you're moda b'miktsas, right? If you're moda to only half of it, and you say the other half never happened, so you pay your half, and chances are you're not going to lie. So therefore, now if there are edim that the malva has, then obviously the lova is stuck. If there's a star or if there's edim working against the lova, then the lova is in trouble. But if the malva has no witnesses and it's only his word against the lova's word, so you believe the lova when he takes a moed b'miksa shvua. All of this psychology, the Gemara ends off by saying, is only the gabe milvahu de'ikalamem hachi. This is only when it comes to the malva because the lova feels pressure and would never lie to someone who did such a great chesed. Avagabe pikadon, when it comes to the shomer, there's no tova, right? If someone gives me an object to watch, he's not doing me a favor. As we said, I'm doing him a favor. So therefore, mehuz and mehuz. So therefore, you know why kihuzeh? You know why the conclusion the Gemara says that moed b'miktsas is only on halva, because this whole psychology of pushing off is only by a halva. It doesn't apply to a pikadon. It doesn't apply to a shomer. Because by a shomer, meyez or meyez. I'm going to be meyez all day long. And even if I'm kofer and everything, if I'm kofer and everything, then, right, even if I'm kofer and everything, then the Torah says, you know what? You want to take a shvua? You got to take a shvua. But there's no moda b'miktsas when it comes to a shomer, only when it comes to kofer hakol by a shomer. That's a machlokes. That's why we have this machlokes between Rav Yochanan and Rav Chia Bar Yosef. So it's 9:00 now. I had other things, but some other insights into Moda Miktsas, but I'll leave you at that. And I just wanted to end on, at least in the Zikin, on a little bit about this Moda Miktsas that we've been talking about in the Daf Yomi world for the last week. Any questions?